high above a war-torn battlefield strewn with corpses, 9 swords stood proud, driven point first into the stone ground, in the shadow of a rocky spire that reached for the skies. They were magnificent weapons, each a masterly work of art, flowing in design and inscribed with myriad glyphs and patterns. The 9 blades formed a broken circle in the stone, with one gap, where the missing 10th blade should have gone. 3,000 years of an endless cycle of war, imprisonment and torture had transformed humanity's 10 greatest heroes into humanity's 10 most broken souls. Unable to endure any longer, 9 among them abandoned their posts, and in so doing, abandoned the 10th to endure eternal torment alone. Welcome to our 3rd video on the Stormlight archive, in which we will tell the story of the Desolations, the endless cycle of apocalyptic wars which brought humanity to the brink of extinction. Join us as we explore the rise of the Heralds of the Almighty and the 10 Orders of the Knights Radiant, and recount their eternal battles against the Voidbringers in a holy struggle whose generational impact still shapes human society on Russia thousands of years after its conclusion. Be warned, spoilers for the first 4 Stormlight Archive books lie ahead. As humans and singers fought one another with the passion of fury and betrayal in their hearts, Odium must have watched on with malicious glee. Yet his counterpart, Honor, did not sit idly by as the vengeful interloper wrought chaos upon the planet he and Cultivation had invested in. Using his powers as the god of oaths and pacts, Honor imprisoned Odium upon Braze, a barren, lifeless rock of a planet which neighbored Russia as the 3rd planet from the Sun in the Rasharan system. Among the modern Vorin peoples of Russia, Braze is remembered as Damnation, their religion's version of hell. Honor's decision to seal a being intent on his destruction in the same star system as himself may seem counterproductive, but it must be remembered that Odium's terrible ambitions extended beyond the Rasharan system. Thus, by sealing Odium in the same system as him, Honor was making a personal sacrifice. He and the peoples of Russia would keep Odium's fury contained, and in so doing, protect the rest of the Cosmere. Early on during the first Desolation, an incredibly peculiar thing happened. The warring gods switched sides, with Odium abandoning humanity and becoming patron to the Singers, and Honor and Cultivation abandoning the Singers and siding with mankind. As of the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive series, it is unknown why this happened. Whatever the reason, from that point on, Honor became the principal god of mankind, and Odium became the supreme overlord of the Singers. Cultivation, meanwhile, melted into the sidelines, taking a background role in the escalating planetary conflict. Despite being stuck on Braze, Odium was still capable of infusing some of his investiture on Russia and enhancing his followers with his powers. While Honor's investiture on Russia manifested as the gaseous white-blue stormlight that blew across the land with every high storm, Odium's investiture infested the planet as red-violet voidlight. It was through infusing certain singers with voidlight that Odium created the Fused. The Fused were singers given immortality by the god of passion. Drawn from among the greatest warriors, kings, priests and heroes among singer kind, these once mortal people of Russia were transformed into formless beings, not unlike the ethereal spren of the cognitive realm. In becoming undying, the Fused gave up their original bodies, but were given the ability to possess the bodies of mortal singers, a process which always killed the host. The Fused could be struck down in battle, but never permanently killed. Whenever their vessels were slain by arrow, sword, or spear, their cognitive spirit simply zipped out from the moribund body as a stream of ghostly voidlight and possessed another mortal singer, being reborn anew. On top of being effectively unkillable, Odium also granted the Fused the use of surges, the very same magics he had once taught the humans of Ashin, which had led to the destruction of their world. The Fused were a game changer. Possessed of awesome powers, no normal human soldier could stand before them. They tore through shield walls, melted infantry blocks, and destroyed entire towns and cities with ease. On the off chance they were killed, they were simply reborn in the nearest singer foot soldier, their powers instantly reawakened in their new host. Through Odium's influence, humanity had begun a war to conquer Russia from the Singers. Now, thanks to that same pandemoniac god, the war was tipped heavily back in the Singers' favour. Humankind could never hope to win when faced with creatures who were reborn each time they were slain. Yet despite their dire straits, honour still lived in the hearts of men, and so the humans and their god conceived of a solution known as the Oathpact. The Oathpact was a magical vow sworn between honour and 10 humans, 5 men and 5 women, who represented the greatest judges, scholars, kings and generals among their race. These fateful 10 became known as the Heralds, and through their connection to honour were elevated to immortality. Moreover, each herald was given an honour blade, an indestructible sword, which gave its user access to the surges formed from a piece of honour's very soul. The leader of the Heralds was Jezrien, the Herald of Kings. By his side was Nael, the Herald of Justice, Chanarach, the Herald of Obedience, Vedel, Herald of Healing, Pylaya, Herald of Learning, Shalash, Herald of Beauty, Batar, Herald of Wisdom, and Kalak, the Herald of Building. In terms of raw investiture, the most powerful of the heralds was Ishar, the Herald of Luck and Binder of Gods. Last among the 10 was Talanel, Herald of War. The Oathpact was initially designed as a final act of self-sacrifice. Through honour's power of oaths, the heralds were given the ability to banish the fused to Braze, the prison planet upon which Odium himself was imprisoned. This would, in effect, end the threat the fused posed to humanity, but there was a catch. In order to keep the fused sealed upon Braze, the heralds would need to imprison themselves on that selfsame lifeless planet. Only by going into exile into damnation could they keep mankind's undying enemies sealed away. Thus the heralds travelled to Braze, and in so doing, imprisoned the fused there. However, there was a second catch, one that neither the heralds nor Honor himself had foreseen. The Oathpact only held as long as all 10 heralds willingly agreed to stay in exile on Braze. If any one of them broke their oath and returned to Roshar, Honor's sealing magic would fail, and the Fuse would be free also to return to Roshar and continue their assault on mankind. Upon learning this, the imprisoned Fused on Braze began hunting down the Heralds. The Heralds naturally fought back, but they were only 10, and the Fused were hundreds. Inevitably, the Heralds were captured and subjected to horrific torture until one of them broke, agreeing to return to Roshar and free the Fused from their prison. Each time the Heralds broke, they returned to lead mankind against the Fused, and after guiding humanity to victory against the Fused on Roshar, they would return to Braze to seal the enemy again. If a Herald died in battle, they would be automatically resurrected on Braze in a reincarnation process which, unlike the Fused, did not require the possession of a mortal body to occur. Every time they returned to the prison planet, be it willingly or by death in battle, the Heralds were immediately captured and tortured by the Fused, and each time one of them would break once more. Thus, the Desolations became something of a cycle, an endless, seemingly never-ending pattern of apocalyptic wars which the Oathpact could stall, but due to the human fallibility of the Heralds, never permanently end. With that said, the Heralds were capable of enduring torture for up to centuries at a time, therefore providing humanity with generations worth of time to rebuild their societies between desolations. Indeed, in the time between desolations, humanity evidently managed to push the Singers to the fringes of the Rosharan landmass and form 10 kingdoms, known as the Silver Kingdoms, which came to dominate the planet's supercontinent. However, it was always only a matter of time until one of the Heralds inevitably broke and unleashed the Fused back on Roshar, triggering a new desolation. Even with the Heralds leading them, human society was practically reduced back to the Stone Age after every desolation, for the Heralds were only 10 and the Fused were many. Thus a new caste of champions arose among the ranks of mankind to even out the field, champions known as the Knights Radiant. At some point during the Desolations, the intelligent Spren of Roshar decided to side with humanity against the Singers. This decision was seen as a huge betrayal by the Singers, who had been friends with the Spren prior to humankind's usurpation of their planet. However, the Spren of Roshar were born of Honor and Cultivation's investiture, and Singers had embraced Odium's corruptive voidlight. So it was that the intelligent Spren of Roshar began infusing themselves with humans through a process known as a Nahel bond. The The process was similar to how their cousins, the mindless Spren, had formed bonds with Roshar's indigenous wildlife and the Singers since time immemorial. The difference was that humans bonding with Spren did not change their form as Singers did, but were granted the power of the Surges. Indeed, as beings of honor, the Spren were capable of mimicking aspects of Honor's Oathpact and giving their human hosts similar powers to the Heralds, albeit not at as potent a level as the Heralds themselves. The Nahel bond was symbiotic, for the intelligent Spren were native to the cognitive realm and were normally incapable of passing into the physical world without becoming mindless. By bonding with humans, they could enter the physical realm and maintain their sense of self. 10 species of Spren developed the ability to form Nahel bonds with humans, each one mimicking the power of one of the Heralds. The result was 10 distinct orders of Knights Radiant, each one formed of humans bonded with a distinct type of Spren. Each order had access to 2 types of surge binding, with each surge possessed by 2 different orders, but no orders having the same 2 surges. While we do not have time to list all 10 orders and their powers, we will go over the ones that feature most prominently in the Stormlight Archive series. Perhaps the most iconic order of the Knights Radiant was the Order of Windrunners, who, bonded with Honor Spren, mimicked the powers of the Herald Jezrien, and were given access to the surges of adhesion and gravitation. This allowed them to stick objects together or alter their gravitational pull, which in a roundabout way allowed them to fly. Windrunners often served as the vanguard on the battlefield. In contrast, the Edge Dancers, who bonded with Cultivation Spren and mimicked the powers of the Herald Vedel, served as its infiltrators. The Edge Dancers had access to the Surge of Abrasion, which was used to manipulate the frictional force between 2 surfaces, allowing them to glide across war zones as effortlessly as a figure skater over ice. They also had access to the Surge of Progression, which gave them healing powers. Many orders of the Knights Radiant were oriented around soldiery, but not all. One example of a primarily non-combat order were the Lightweavers, who bonded with Cryptics and mimicked the powers of the Herald Shalash. The Lightweavers possessed the surges of illumination and transformation, which allowed them to create auditory and visual illusions, as well as change their appearance, making them ideal spies and secret agents. The powers of the Knights Radiant existed on a progression system that followed a tiered system of magic oaths, known as ideals or immortal words, which when spoken would strengthen the Nahel bond between a Radiant and their Spren. Each order had a different set of immortal words, but all of them shared the same first ideal: life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. As Radiants progressed to a point where they spoke their second, third, and fourth ideals, their Spren gained the ability to transform into a Shardblade and pull lesser Spren from the cognitive realm and form them into Shard Plate. However, attaining the ideals was not as simple as speaking the words. If a Radiant spoke their oaths without meaning them, nothing would happen. Only when a Radiant was truly ready to uphold the principles of their order would their Nahel bond strengthen. This system effectively served as a limitation upon the raw power of surge binding. For surge binding had once destroyed a planet, and thus Honor and the Spren ensured that humankind would only ever use such powers with magical checks and safeguards in place. The supernatural abilities of the Knights Radiant were powered directly by Honor's investiture, which was most easily obtainable in the form of Stormlight. Knights Radiant could absorb Stormlight directly by standing in high storms, or, far more safely, by simply sucking it out of Stormlight-infused gemstones. Without Stormlight, a Radiant's powers barely worked, but when infused with Stormlight, a Radiant was practically invulnerable. The Stormlight in their bodies gave them powerful regenerative properties that allowed them to recover from all but the most mortal of wounds. A Stormlight-infused Radiant was even capable of regrowing severed limbs. At some point between Desolations, the Knights Radiant congregated to build a home base for themselves, a tower city, which they gave the sacred palindromic name of Urithiru. This massive spire was nestled deep in the treacherous mountains of Ur, and accessible only by flight or by Oathgate, teleportation devices located in the capital of each of the Silver Kingdoms, powered by Spren with access to the surge of transportation. As for the 10 Heralds, although they were initially hesitant to acknowledge the Radiants who had mimicked their powers, they soon came to embrace them and became the leaders of their corresponding orders. Thus, from its construction onwards, Urithiru became humanity's main base, a place from where the Heralds and their Knights Radiant led the charge against the forces of Odium whenever a desolation occurred. However, even with the Heralds and the Knights Radiant serving as the shield of mankind, each desolation was still a brutal, cataclysmic and hard-won affair. The Fused, after all, remained incredibly formidable opponents, something of a mirror image to the Radiants. There were 9 types of Fused, each of which had powers which roughly correspond to those of an Order of Radiance. For example, the Shanaim, or Heavenly Ones, had access to the Surge of Gravitation, and thus often dueled the Windrunners in the skies in a deadly cosmic ballet. Meanwhile, the Shetelim, or Flowing Ones, controlled the Surge of Abrasion and glided toe-for-toe against the speedy Edgerunners. Moreover, Odium's armies consisted of far more than just the Fused. Just like Honor and Cultivation's investiture had resulted in the creation of intelligent Spren, so too did Odium's investiture do the same. While Spren born of Honor and Cultivation sided with humanity and helped create the Knights Radiant, Spren born of Odium, known as Void Spren, helped empower the Singers. By infusing themselves in a Singer's gemstone, they were able to grant a Singer forms of power which enhanced their strength and speed, and allowed them to shoot lightning out of their fingertips. Singers bonded to Void Spren were known as Regals, and while they weren't as powerful or held in as high esteem as the Fused, they were still incredibly dangerous opponents. Beyond Fused and Regals, the forces of Odium could also call upon Juggernauts, known as the Thunderclasts, giant stone monsters that stood as tall as hills, impervious to all weapons, except a Radiance Shardblade. At the lowest tier of Odium's army were the normal Singers. They were standard, mortal beings who served mostly as expendable infantry under the command of the Fused. Indeed, as much as humanity suffered under Odium's wrath, the Singers suffered harder. Their fight to reclaim their planet from the human colonizers, appropriated by the god of passion, who utilized their rage to turn them into disposable bodies for his army. Like the Fused, Void Spren and Thunderclasts were sealed on braes after each desolation, only to return at the beginning of the next. As the desolations continued, they settled into a predictable yet devastating form of tiered warfare, in which blocks of mundane human and Singer soldiers clashed against one another upon barren, storm-swept plains, while beings infused with the investiture of Honor and Odium soared above and around them, streaks of Stormlight and voidlight entwining in testament to the seemingly endless conflict of gods and men. Over time, humanity came to refer to the apocalyptic, cyclically returning armies of Odium as the Voidbringers, co-opting the very name the Singers had used to refer to humanity when humanity had first betrayed Singer kind. However, it should be noted that while much information on the Desolations has been lost by the modern age, that the reality on the ground was not a binary struggle between humans and Singers. The modern Hadazian and Unkalaki peoples of Russia are both human races with a substrate of ancient Singer ancestry, and are proof of the fact that cohabitation between Singers and mankind must have occurred during the heraldic epochs, between the cycle of wars driving the two species apart. Moreover, while most Singers rallied behind Odium in his war against Honor and mankind, not all did. Towards the end of the Desolations, a group of regal Singers, known as the Last Legion, deserted the armies of the Fused, forswore Odium as their god, and fled to the remote Far East. There they gave up all their forms of power, and reduced themselves only to dull form. This was the ultimate sacrifice for liberation, for by giving up their voidlight-powered forms, the Singers of the Last Legion were reduced to slow, nearly mindless beings, but it freed them from Odium's grasp. When the Oathpact was first formed around 7,000 years ago, the Heralds were possessed of immense mental fortitude, able to endure the torture of the Fused for centuries at a time, and in so doing, giving humanity many generations to rebuild between each desolation. However, it was only a matter of time before the countless lifetimes worth of torture took their toll. By 2 millennia after the founding of the Oathpact, the time between desolations had gradually shrunk from centuries to decades. Soon the desolations were separated by fewer than 10 years. Each desolation scoured mankind, wiping out any cities they had built, technology they had developed, and claiming a death toll as high as 90% of the population of entire kingdoms. Now, as the resolve of the Heralds wavered, humanity was left with practically no time at all to rebuild and recover from the severe depopulation and near Stone Age state that each desolation left them in. Thus, our story arrives at an event remembered by the modern Vorin religion as Aharietiam, the last desolation. A misnomer, for Aharietiam was a desolation like any other, with only one difference. After defeating the Fused on Roshar, 9 Heralds had survived, with only one having died in battle and thereby sent back to Braze. One by one, the surviving Heralds realized that the one returned Herald happened to be the only one who, in the millennia since the founding of the Oathpact, had never broke under the Fused's torture, Tellanel, the Herald of War. The surviving 9 Heralds came together and made a decision to abandon the Oathpact forever and allow the 10th among them, Tellanel, to endure torture on Braze alone. So it was that the immortal leaders of humanity announced to the Knights Radiant and all of humanity that the final desolation had occurred and the cycle was broken. This was a lie, of course, but one that, perhaps to the Herald's own surprise, became the truth. For indeed, alone in damnation, the 10th abandoned Herald endured the torture of the Fused alone and never broke. For 4,500 years, Tellanel kept the forces of Odium at bay at the cost of endless torment to himself. By abandoning him to suffer alone, the Heralds had actually broken the cycle of desolations, at least for now. In our next episode in this series, we will cover the Era of Solitude, in which human society recovers from the desolations, the fall of the Knights Radiant, and explore how the world of contemporary Roshar, presented in the Stormlight archive, begins to take shape. To make sure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to learn our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.